Namaskar and welcome to India Diplomacy, a show on India's national television channel Doordarshan about Indian foreign policy, India's international relations, and important developments in international politics that have a bearing on India's rise. Viewers, in this episode, we are taking a close look at global geopolitical flux. Geopolitics, which is the science and art of major powers vying and competing against each other for control over strategic locations around the world. This has existed since time immemorial. But in this episode, we are looking at the contemporary geopolitics and the twists and turns and the unexpected directions in which it's going, and what can we expect going into the future in light of this flux. And to discuss this, I'm really privileged to introduce you to one of the top gurus of global geopolitics, who's based in Austria, a writer, thinker, and commentator who's widely recognized for her original and astute observations of geopolitics, Velina Tchakarova. Velina Tchakarova is based in Austria, in Vienna, and she's joining us today all the way from there. Velina, welcome to Indian Diplomacy.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a big honor.
Velina, you are based in Europe, so I want to kickstart our discussion by talking about this unexpected turn with regard to the Western alliance as a whole. With the return of Donald Trump in the last few months, we are seeing somewhat of a widening rift across the Atlantic between the United States and Europe. And we see there's a lot of soul searching going on in Europe about their own distinct role in the world. Should they tie their wagon to the American horse, or should they go it alone and become more autonomous? On the issue of the Ukraine war, how to end the war, on what terms to end the war, on the issue of how to deal with Russia, and of course on the issue of the trade war that Trump has unleashed against the Europeans. It looks like there's a lot of discord.
Indeed, this transatlantic divide on the Trump 2.0 is, in my view, not merely tactical. It is structural and it is systemic, and let me explain very shortly why. Now, the announcement of US tariffs on European industrial goods is just the one side of the story, which shows that the US doesn't look at Europe as, let's say, strategic equal, but rather as a junior partner, and to some extent also as a geoeconomic competitor. But then the other side of the story is about the reduced US commitment on the old continent when it comes to, let's say, military aid for Ukraine, when it comes to the common position to end the war. And the only, let's say, so far, way of ending the war on the old continent was for both US and the European Union members to comprehensively support Ukraine during this war, or if you like, following this kind of motto of whatever it takes, what was actually the G7 statement from previous meetings. So you have reduced US commitment on the old continent, you have reduced NATO commitments, where now the expectation is that the European NATO members have to significantly increase their defense budgets up to 5%. You have the announcement, the official announcement of withdrawal from the old continent. And I don't mean only military presence, but I mean, of course, in terms of, again, strategic commitment. And then you have also this whole transactional diplomacy, because you know for a fact that Trump is anti-globalist. He doesn't like organizations and institutions such as the European Union or NATO, and Trump's America First doctrine prioritizes bilateral deals and short-term wins over any multilateral consensus or, let's say, shared identity. So to go back to your question, will this be the trigger for strategic autonomy, the famous call by French President Macron even prior to the re-election of Trump? Remember when Macron also announced the brain dead NATO? I can only give you a mixed reply, meaning that there will be certainly efforts towards enhancing defense capabilities. Now we have all these huge announcements in terms of Germany's Zeitenwende that is spending 100 billion special fund on defense. Then we have 800 billion announcement on behalf of the European Union, including 150 billion loans for, again, actually European defense systems. And then we have, of course, also the issue of European NATO members trying to deepen the interoperability. Think of the eastern flank of NATO. And last point, of course, coherent European position on the support for Ukraine, which also includes, of course, defense support. So this is the, let's say, the upside of this story emerging from the rift between the transatlantic allies. But the reality is much more brutal than we wish it to be. As you know, in geopolitics, there is no room for, for feelings or normative wishful thinking. And the reality is that as we speak, Europe has also, so to say, replaced the past formula of cheap fossil fuels, quick access to the Chinese market and Chinese production, and American security umbrella with what exactly? Actually, with American fossil fuels, with access to the American market, because many European companies, meanwhile, over the last 3 years, have been also looking to leave the old continent because of competition problems, which are not only linked to, to the transatlantic rift, they are actually linked to the European problems that the continent is facing right now. And obviously, then again, the security umbrella is still very much relevant.
Yeah, so it's a mixed picture indeed, and we have to see whether the Europeans will really become truly a separate power center, different from the US in the long run. But talking of the Russia factor, obviously, Velina, you are all watching the war and the aggravation of the crisis that Trump had supposedly come in to resolve once and for all. But increasingly, Trump himself has become highly frustrated with President Vladimir Putin, and it seems to be going nowhere. And the last phrase I heard Trump use for his Russian counterpart was absolutely crazy. So what happened to that idea of the reverse Nixon, that, finally the US will approach Russia with a more open mind and will embrace Russia and will co-opt Russia and will disentangle Russia from the no limits partnership with China? You have described the China-Russia relationship famously as a dragon bear. So what happens to the dragon bear it looks like it may be still intact, because Trump's overtures toward Russia do not seem to be paying off. And maybe it's a tall task, because even the first term of Trump, people said that, he is going to approach Russia with a non-liberal, unorthodox approach, and ultimately it didn't work out. So what's your reading of this Putin-Trump love-hate relationship that seems to be now going more towards the hate, but we don't know how it will end up?
Well, let's start first with the seductive simplicity of this reverse Nixon-Kissinger thesis, the idea being that if Nixon and Kissinger could flip mouse China to isolate the Soviet Union in the 70s, then Trump, who prides himself on disruptive deal-making, might try and be successful in getting the inverse, pry Putin's Russia away from Xi Jinping's China. But to what outcome? Obviously, the outcome of that success, which I regard being quite unlikely, especially in the short to middle term. But still, let's take a look at it. What would be the outcome? Well, obviously, the encirclement of China in this new Cold War 2.0. So any geopolitical rapprochement between United States and Russia will be worst case scenario from China's perspective. That's absolutely clear. And obviously, this was also one of the main reasons why Western analysts got the Chinese reaction immediately after the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine absolutely wrong. But even worse than that, they actually overlooked the systemic convergence, because the dragon bear is not a tactical alignment. It's not a strategic alliance in the sense how the West understands, for instance, NATO as a defense alliance based on shared values and shared strategic vision and shared interests. This systemic convergence has been organically emerging top-down, strictly top-down, steered by the two leaders, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, over more than 10 years now. So it's not, the very fact that it has manifested now is just because we are in a geopolitical influx, in a geopolitical, what I call geopolitical interregnum right now. But to really wrap it up for you, why is it not possible in the short term, is because of the gains that both Russia and China can get from this systemic convergence, from this modus operandi of strategic coordination in all systemically relevant domains right now. And it's not just about creating a credible counterweight to the American power projection. It's in fact how they want to shape global and regional geopolitics differently, and they are indeed quite successful in that as we speak.
Yeah. So I think it looks like Trump's efforts might go in vain, but we'll still see, because there seem to be so many flip-flops and fluctuations on a daily basis on these matters. You've already mentioned the dragon. Let's focus a little bit on the dragon now, Velina. China obviously likes the transatlantic rift because it weakens the Western alliance as a whole. China does not want a rift between itself and Russia, as you have said, because united they are a lot stronger against the West. But China has its eyes on dominating the Indo-Pacific. And we just heard Pete Hegseth, the US Defense Secretary, saying that under Trump's watch, we will not allow China to invade Taiwan. And he says that if at all deterrence breaks down, then the United States will actually fight and will win decisively against China. Now, that is a strong language, but the question is, are the Chinese going to buy these kind of assurances the US is giving to their allies and partners in Asia? Or will China think that maybe Trump is a transactionalist and, anyway, they are likely to strike a trade deal with the US, and therefore, he may just leave Taiwan to be eaten for lunch? Or what? I mean, there are so many other, crises in this region of the Indo-Pacific. As you know, the South China Sea disputes, the conflict with India, and the competition we have with China. So, given all these factors, what is your risk assessment of Indo-Pacific in this, unpredictable era, where we are not sure about US commitments, but the US is loudly proclaiming and giving security guarantees and commitments?
Mm-hmm. Well, in my strategic outlook, already from the previous year, I argued that the Indo-Pacific is going to be the hottest place amid this Cold War 2.0 between America on the one hand and the dragon bear on the other hand. And the manifestation of it will happen already in 2025. So it's not going to be Ukraine, it's not going to be Gaza and the Middle East, it's going to be the Indo-Pacific, with this combination, of course, of what I describe a death by thousand cuts approach by Beijing to Taiwan. So this, and I can explain a little bit what it means, but also, of course, the militarization of the Indo-Pacific, the creation of new facts on the ground in this gray zone warfare, because we have entered the era of gray zone warfare. That is what Cold War 2.0 is about. Anything below the threshold of kinetic conflict is already happening in the region. And this is what I'm trying to, convey as a message, that this is the new normal in the Indo-Pacific. So we are going to witness daily airspace incursions and naval encirclement drills, and drills that, point to economic blockade, cyber attacks and digital infiltration, as well as political and economic coercion. And all of this, the full package, is what this, what will make these flashpoints beyond Taiwan so dangerous. When it comes to Taiwan, I do not share, the assessment of many of my colleagues who are now pointing to this upcoming blitzkrieg-style warfare by Beijing on Taiwan by 2027. I do agree that China will make sure to be ready by 2027. To start an invasion. But being ready doesn't necessarily mean or result in also a concrete plan to invade, especially because Xi Jinping has now a playbook thanks to Putin's strategic failures in Ukraine. The war of Russia against Ukraine is in its fourth year, and unfortunately, this is a war that will continue probably beyond 2030. Yes, you hear me well, beyond 2030. So Xi Jinping, in my view, has no intention of repeating these strategic failures, of getting caught in a long-term war. So instead, a death by thousand cuts strategy means this slow but steady penetration of the political system of Taiwan, of the economic vibrant model of Taiwan, but also of the social fabric of Taiwan in a long run of, let's say, 5, 8, 10 years.
Not maybe a hot war, but definitely a cold war, which will involve this salami slicing, death by 1,000 cuts, gray zone, and much more aggression, much more violence, but hopefully not all-out war. Velina, we talked about Trump and, the kind of uncertainty that he brings to the table on all global issues. But you also mentioned a very interesting phrase early on. You said that you believe we are in a geopolitical interregnum. So let's focus for a moment on other factors that are driving this tendency towards anarchy, chaos, or offensive. Like many countries, revisionist powers believe that offensive has the advantage, and they're going on the rampage. So what is it structurally? What is this interregnum, or are we between two different eras? Obviously, the post-Cold War era is over, as by all accounts. We have not yet found a name for this. Some people are calling it New Cold War. So what is your reading of this interregnum and this era, which is inherently or structurally driving a lot of this geopolitical flux and unbelievable shifts and transformations?
So yes, this is obviously the end of an era, if you like, the end of the Western liberal order or rules-based order as we've known it since post-1945 and then post-1991, following the collapse of the Soviet Union. This is the reality on the one side. When it comes next, what comes next to a new order, because we are in this transitional phase, so that is why geopolitical interregnum. My current assessment also differentiates from the one of the, let's say, the majority of geopolitical experts who point to this volatile, chaotic multipolarity. I just don't see multiple centers of power emerging right now as a full package. And let me explain what I mean by that. So the structural bifurcation I've been pointing to for more than 10 years now means actually the emergence of two absolutely incompatible systems. So the repercussions, the geopolitical and the geoeconomic ones from the emergence of these two incompatible systems are devastating. This is why we qualitatively and quantitatively have the worst case of military conflicts and wars right now. So if you take a look at the number of conflicts and wars, you clearly have the full picture. You clearly see that it's the highest since the end of the Second World War. If you take a look at the qualitative part of the way how wars and military conflicts are being waged right now, it's absolutely devastating. We do not need even to start discussing that part. Take a look at the Russian war, which is the most systemic risk, not only to Ukraine in terms of full subjugation and extermination, but also obviously in terms of the possibility for the destruction of the security architecture in Europe. If you take a look at the Middle East, and again, you clearly see it's not just Hamas and Israel escalation. It's not only Israel and Iran. You have also the whole case of Palestine with the devastating humanitarian loss for the Palestinian people. And then you have also all of these, regional dynamics on the ground where Arab states and Israel are still in a kind of a mode to try to find a way towards normalization. And then we obviously discussed already the Indo-Pacific, and not to speak of the whole gray zone in Latin America, Africa, and certain parts of Asia and Europe, where you have also terrorist activities, you have proxy wars, you have military tensions.
I want to take us to the end of the show because we are here in India and we have this vision of a emerging multipolar order. And, India recently overtook Japan and became the fourth largest economy in the world. It's likely to overtake Germany very soon and become the third largest. Of course, there's a huge gap between India on one hand and China and the US. But, we are working towards becoming a great power ourselves. And recently we saw in the India-Pakistan, clashes and confrontation that China was firmly on the side of Pakistan and supplied weapons and gave military and intelligence and diplomatic support. And there was just no question about the fact that there can be any kind of a peace or coexistence or friendship between India and China. It was quite proven in that conflict, that the brief confrontation. So where does India stand in your estimate in this race or in this new emerging order or in this interregnum?
Yes. So in my view, as I've been arguing for quite some time now, India is the only authentic geopolitical and geoeconomic bridge builder right now. That is a player on the global arena that is able to take the best from both worlds right now. So it is interacting, and rightfully so, with both systems for the moment because it has the military footprint and power projection in the region. It has the geoeconomic clout. It has the political leadership, and it has the, let's say, its own national interest and ability to do so, contrary to many other regional players. So India is, of course, deepening the relationship with the so-called West, with both America and the European Union members on the one hand, in specific areas when it comes to improving the standard of life of its own people, when it comes to technology transfer, modernization, and so on. But on the other hand, India has also deepened the strategic partnership with Russia and has normalized the relationship with China last year. And all of this was also, in my view, strategically the correct recalibration for this specific interregnum. Why? Because right now India can provide certain regional stability with its, in terms of the relationship with its strategic rival being China, in order to focus on economic growth, on actually uplifting its own citizens from a certain, economic state into a much more improved one. I think this is the way forward. On the one hand, at the same time, this Indian leadership and this Indian position is much more, it's is much more mature than, let's say, the previous role of India during the First Cold War. So this is not going to be a non-alignment movement and India being positioned as a leader within it, in my view. I would argue that India will establish itself as its own authentic center of power at some point of time in the future. But for that to happen, there are certain necessary steps that need to be made in terms of modernization of Indian army, in terms of riding the wave of the fourth industrial revolution, most likely with Western partners, mostly because of the problem with Chinese technologies. And then, of course, in terms of geo-economic and in terms of regional partnerships, here, once again, I'm actually quite bullish on the Indian position. But, of course, there are a lot of issues, and you've mentioned some of them. There are regional problems with, the neighbor Pakistan, as we saw. We have also Chinese string of pearls approach to Indian neighbors in South Asia, and this is something that India will have to tackle. So for the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years, I will argue that this grand strategy to leverage the global disorder, to push back against China, but also to push back against Western partners when it comes to, for instance, the partnership with Russia. I would argue that Russia would, India would not give up on Russia for the sake of its own national interest.
Yeah.
So
it's going to be a balancing act.
Is the right one.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of permutations and combinations for a rising power in this geopolitical interregnum. Viewers, fascinating discussion with Velina Tchakarova. Many takeaways. But for me, the main thing is that this is an unsettled period and a difficult era where war, anarchy, chaos, violence are on the rise. But at the same time, we may be able to avoid all-out major power war because of different structural reasons. And so there's also some room for optimism. India is rising, and Velina is bullish about India, and so are we. And I think the international community believes that India's rise is for regional and global stability. We'll have to see 5-10 years down the line as we catch up with China and the US, how to reassess this situation. But for now, there are two systems, as Velina says, and competing systems, and India is trying to forge its own path and ultimately hope to pave its own system, which will be distinct from the US and China, but not through non-alignment. So let me thank Velina Tchakarova. Very complex issues that you've untangled for our audience. I really appreciate your time and effort.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to your show. It's a great pleasure.
So viewers, you must have heard of an acronym called VUCA, V-U-C-A. It is often used in the military circles. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So this era is a VUCA era by all means, and we'll have to see how different powers navigate. The discussion today showed you some of these aspects, but there's so much more. So do continue following this geopolitical flux, where it will ultimately settle, and in the form of what new order, we'll have to wait and see. We have to also will it. The new order has to be willed through the concerted action of conscious minds. So we are all watching, but also we need to act individually as Indians, but also collectively with our partners to try and shape this uncertain period. Thank you for watching. I'll see you again next time. Until then, take care.